Morning. My name is Suzanne Powell. I'm the current president of the Victoria Civic Heritage Trust. Thank you to the Mayor and Council for the opportunity to present here today and highlight the activities of the Trust. I'm joined here with a few of my colleagues from the VCHT. To my immediate right is Kate Ulmer, Vice President of the VCHT. Kate is also a structural engineer with Herald Engineering. To my immediate left is Catherine Umland, the Executive Director of the VCHT. And at the end of the table, we have Pamela Madoff, who is the Chair of the Architectural Conservation Committee. So with that, I will turn it over to Catherine, who will do the presentation for us.
Thanks very much. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Catherine.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make a presentation on the work of the Victoria Civic Heritage Trust. We wish to honor and acknowledge that our work with Victoria's community heritage is located on the homelands of the Songhees and Esquimalt people. The Victoria Civic Heritage Trust was established by the city in 1989, among other things, to administer the Downtown Heritage Building Incentive Program. Initial funds came from the proceeds of the city's sale of Broad Street, yes, part of a street, which allowed the then Eaton Center to be built. The VCHT is a nonprofit society and a federally registered charity, which acts as an arm's-length municipal heritage trust, similar in model to those in the United States and UK. The VCHT operates heritage incentive programs based on established policy with an independent, nonpartisan board comprised of professionals and business people, with 2 council appointees and a non-voting city staff liaison, the senior heritage planner. We are always grateful to the city for its ongoing financial support with annual capital and operating grants. We are here today to give a brief overview of what the VCHT does, and by inference, what we do not do. Today, we will focus on the VCHT's core mandate, which is to conserve Victoria's built community heritage. We do that through the Building Incentive Program, or we call it BIP for short, and the Parapet Incentive Program, PIP for short. In addition to our core mandate, we also assist the city with technical reviews and recommendations for the Tax Incentive Program, and that one is TIP for short. With limited time, we have prepared some handouts for you and have moved some of our more technical information about TIP to answer questions, such as how the TIP residential exemption periods and partial exemptions are calculated, the issue of facadism as it relates to TIP eligibility, and other topics. We would also like to offer to make a different presentation to you at another time on the important role of heritage in downtown revitalization. Here is a quick snapshot of where we do most of our work. To date, VCHT has processed 375 BIP and PIP applications and 36 Tax Incentive Program applications for a total of 411. As you can see in the pie chart, BIP represents 83% of the work that we do. PIP represents 8% and TIP 9% of the total applications processed. The Building Incentive Program represents a very large body of work with a very diverse built, cultural, and spiritual heritage. Most of our work in the past decade has been with building owners in Chinatown, the North End, downtown, and various neighborhoods within the city. We work with small and medium and large-sized heritage buildings and many projects with multiple buildings. So what is the Building Incentive Program? It is a cash incentive program as opposed to a tax incentive program. It offers cash money for heritage designated buildings that provides 50% matching funds to a maximum of $100,000 per building within a 10-year period. Under BIP, 50% matching funds to a maximum of $5,000 are also provided for preliminary consultant fees at the beginning of the project. BIP can be combined with PIP or TIP, so that gives a synergistic effect when we can combine different funding opportunities. There is a wide range of eligible work under BIP. Some applications may be quite targeted, such as for work on exterior window conservation or masonry conservation work, or building access and lighting. But they can also go through to full building conservation projects and seismic upgrading. Here's a small sampling of some of the work done in the community under BIP. And here's a sample of a building transformation, which shows the dramatic changes that often occur before and after conservation. This being down on Lower Yates Street. There are 4 types of buildings that can receive funding for building incentive program. And they are commercial, industrial, institutional, and apartment buildings. Our companion or sister organization, if you want to call it that, is the Victoria Heritage Foundation, and they deal with residential, and we deal with the balance in the city. Commercial heritage buildings represent the most common. Though there are many, many examples under BIP, we've selected Market Square as a good example of an effective multi-building heritage conservation project. It was, in fact, the first project in Victoria in the 1970s to bring revitalization to the downtown through an innovative design that integrated the conservation of a large grouping of commercial heritage buildings with an interior courtyard. There has been ongoing work through BIP since 1990 on Market Square, with projects and updates being done in a number of buildings which have kept Market Square current and active. Here are some images of what the 2-story interior courtyard looked like before, when it was a parking lot, and what it looks like now as a revitalized space for special events and activities which draw residents and tourists alike. 7 buildings at Market Square have received BIP funds at various times. Here's an example of before and after images of rehabilitation work at the Scott and Peden building, which involved brick masonry and window conservation work and reconfiguring the storefront. You'll see there the before and then during construction when they had to unload debris out from the building, and then the after. An excellent example of recent work done on 2 industrial heritage buildings is the adaptive reuse and conservation of the powerhouse building at 2110 Store Street and the admin building across the street from it at 502 Pembroke. This is another impressive transformation of 2 large derelict and underused structures into what are now fully occupied buildings with new and cutting-edge business uses. Here is the work on the powerhouse under construction, and then after. You can see what the transformation is. Here is the before and after work done on the admin building, showing the artistic and contemporary uses of the building, especially on the interior. Institutional heritage buildings are most commonly brick and wood buildings, which are either adapted to another use or retain their original use. Examples include former schools, former hospitals that are adaptively reused, as well as former and current places of worship. Also eligible for BIP are heritage apartment buildings, which are mostly wood frame but vary in size and scale. Hampton Court at 159 Cook Street is an example of a larger apartment building. And the residential flats building at 1009 Southgate Street is an example of a smaller apartment building that was originally built as a fourplex. The Parapet Incentive Program was started under BIP in 2015, and this followed the the awakening of the world to seismic upgrading issues with back-to-back earthquakes with Japan and New Zealand at Christchurch, Christchurch being in February of 2011. And shortly after that, we began doing workshops and investigating how to up our interest and our activity in the area of seismic upgrading. This program started as a pilot program in 2015. It provides an enhanced incentive of 75% co-funding, and the purpose of the enhancement is to encourage uptake in the program. It has just recently been, the maximum has just recently been raised to $200,000 per building in acknowledgement of some of the rising costs for seismic upgrading. PIP also provides design assistance grant co-funded by the owner at 75% to a maximum of $4,500 for preliminary engineering fees, which will help to determine what the design is moving forward for the Parapet Incentive Program funds. PIP can also be combined with the Building Incentive Program. PIP is for voluntary seismic upgrading. This is the reason we're saying voluntary is important because under the tax incentive program, that is often mandatory seismic upgrading. This is filling a gap between the Building Incentive Program and the tax incentive program. So for voluntary seismic upgrading of specifically exterior falling hazards as a first phase of seismic upgrading of a building. So what are seismic falling hazards? Basically, anything that can fall off a building that poses a public risk to life safety in a seismic event. Examples are shown here, such as parapets and cornices that need bracing, architectural details, signs, flagpoles, fire escapes, and balconies, all involving seismic remediation with anchor connections back into the building, as well as re-roofing, roof-to-wall connections, and roof diaphragm upgrades. Current BIP and PIP applications include the Strand Hotel at Market Square, which is currently under construction. And you'll see a Facebook post that they just put on last week thanking the city and the VCHT for the project. There are also, this is very interesting, 3 separate applications that we have received and are in process with 3 different building owners in Chinatown who have decided to work together as a group to do parapet and re-roofing on their buildings with PIP funding. And those 3 buildings are at 1713 Government Street, 612 Fiskard Street, and 614 Fiskard Street. Here are the current BIP and PIP stats. From the start of operation in 1990, there have been 375 BIP and PIP funding awards to 160 heritage buildings, with 60 new heritage designations directly related to BIP funding. $7.83 million in city funds have been invested in BIP and PIP, with an estimated private investment of $166.57 million, resulting in an average ratio of $21.27 in private investment for every $1 spent in public investment. That was our core mandate. Now, we also assist the city with the tax incentive program, and this started with both the residential use and the non-residential uses of streams of the program. Since its inception, the VCHT has prioritized housing and seismic upgrading for heritage buildings, particularly in the downtown area. Among a lot of other work in this area, there were 2 pivotal studies that the VCHD was involved with that helped to pave the way for TIP. In 1992, the city partnered with the city on a housing study by architect Jonathan Yardley that identified seismic upgrading costs as the chief impediment to residential conversion of vacant or underutilized downtown heritage buildings. In 1994, the playing field was changed completely when the province of BC adopted new legislation enabling a whole new range of heritage conservation legislative tools, including permissive tax exemptions. This was followed in 1995 by a study by the VCHD called Moving Up. I've actually got a copy with me here, about generating affordable housing in the downtown in underutilized and vacant upper stories. This was funded by BC Housing that inventoried potential downtown heritage buildings to determine the scope of opportunity for a new incentive program aimed to convert vacant and underutilized upper stories to residential use. The study found that there were potentially 115 buildings located in the downtown area that were good candidates, and then the prime candidates were identified as being 71 buildings in the downtown area. In 1995, the city also engaged Clayton Research to do a property tax incentive study to investigate the feasibility, mechanisms, and policies needed for a tax incentive program for City of Victoria. Also in 1995, Council approved in principle the creation of a tax incentive program, and 3 years later, in 1998, it was given final approval. The key takeaway for TIP is regarding the provincial enabling legislation that was adopted in 1994, which purpose is to provide protection and support to conserve heritage property. It is significant to note that in Section 25 of the Community Charter, municipal councils are prohibited from providing a grant, benefit, advantage, or other form of assistance to a business, including an exemption from a tax or fee. The only exceptions in the Charter to this prohibition are for the purposes of acquiring and conserving and developing heritage property, increasing heritage awareness, and other activities as determined by Council with respect to the conservation of heritage property. The requirements for a municipality to provide a tax exemption for heritage purposes are detailed in Section 225 of the Community Charter under Partnering Heritage, Riparian, and Other Special Exemption Authority. TIP operates with 2 very different streams for residential and non-residential heritage buildings. Common to both streams is that the tax incentive must be for heritage conservation purposes, which means new construction or development are not eligible for tax exemption. For both streams, the maximum tax exemption period is capped at 10 years by the provincial legislation. So reading under the residential use, this is just a short way to try to capture what the program is intended to do. It is to give a 10-year tax exemption to help offset the cost specifically of seismic upgrading to convert existing upper story space to residential use, and it's based on the length of the exemption period is based on a formula for property tax. That is in contrast to the non-residential use program, which followed a few years after the residential use because of interest in commercial owners in the downtown to also be able to have tax exemptions. So this is also a 10-year tax exemption, and it's to help offset costs for a major rehabilitation project. So that's usually top to bottom rehabilitation of the building, including code upgrading on the interior. And this is based on a city-appointed independent consultant's financial review of the project cost pro forma. So what's resulted from TIP since it started in 1998 is 36 projects totaling 47 heritage buildings. The breakdown of the buildings is 8 rehabilitated non-residential buildings and 39 buildings with residential conversions and seismic upgrading, which has resulted in 703 new housing units in heritage buildings. It is noteworthy that 50% of the projects created rental units. TIP has offset an estimated $63.13 million in seismic upgrading costs and has generated an estimated $290.46 million in construction. As well, this has led to more vibrant mixed uses, especially in buildings in the North End and Chinatown. The VCHT's role to assist the city is to provide technical review and recommendations based on TIP policies. This chart, which is also included as a handout, which I presume has been given to you, shows the city's TIP process. The VCHT enters into the process in 2 places, and sometimes also at the beginning of the process, depending on the senior heritage planner. Like BC Assessment, VCHT enters at the evaluation stage to provide a technical review of the application, including review of the proposed seismic upgrading design, and to make a recommendation by letter to Mayor and Council. The VCHT then enters the process again at the final review stage with review of the project financials and seismic certification by the project engineer, to conduct a site visit also to confirm that the work was completed, and finally to prepare a sign-off letter to city staff so that they can in turn process the approved tax exemption to BC Assessment. The main task of the VCHT for the final review is to match up the approved work with the completed work. TIP residential use projects. One of the major successes of the TIP is its synergistic effect on seismic upgrading in clusters of multiple buildings. For example, the north side of the 500 block of Yates Street has now had seismic upgrading done in all of the buildings except for 2. And this is an amazing accomplishment. Examples of the range and scale of TIP residential projects are the BC Produce building at 529 Pandora, which created 2 non-strata units at one end of the scale, and then at the other end of the scale is the Hudson's Bay building at 1701 Douglas, which created 152 strata units. The most recently completed TIP residential project is at 727 Johnson Street, the Livery Muse. This is a 3-story heritage building with a 2-story rooftop addition that created 30 rental units. Here are some images of other tax incentive program projects. You'll see a wide variety that you may recognize within the city. TIP non-residential use projects are for non-residential commercial, industrial, and institutional heritage buildings for the purpose of substantial rehabilitation or a new use for the building. For code upgrading, it would be seismic, electrical, mechanical, and fire protection as code upgrading, as well as energy retrofits and exterior conservation. The owner submits a project pro forma and pays fees to the city, which appoints an independent financial consultant to assess the proposed costs to determine whether the project requires a tax incentive to be financially viable. Examples of 2 non-residential commercial heritage building projects are at the corner of Broughton Street and Langley Street, which resulted in full top-to-bottom building rehabilitation that included a new underground geothermal heating and cooling system, and at the building next door, owned by the same owner, which spans between Langley and Government, also resulted in a full top-to-bottom building rehabilitation. Here are some images of the interior, which show the high quality of work that was done. An example of a non-residential industrial heritage building project that has just recently been completed is at 2621 Douglas Street, the Victoria Press building, which was used to house the Times Colonist. This is a unique mid-century modern building that has undergone a full building rehabilitation with seismic upgrading and adaptive reuse to provide shared open plan industrial and office spaces. Here are some interior shots of this exciting project. We would like to invite council to join us on our upcoming site visit to tour this project and to learn more on site about how this project meets all of the TIP policies. Possible upcoming TIP projects which are expected to be eligible and to meet the TIP policies are the W.G. Cameron Building at 579 Johnson Street, which we see is on today's council agenda, and 1244 Wharf Street. VCHT looks forward to reviewing these projects. And with that, we would like to thank you, Mayor and Council, for your time and attention.